Hello and welcome back to IllumiNation, the Disney Lorcana podcast. My name's Max, and I am coming at you solo this week. It's just me, it's just you, and we're talking about Disney Lorcana, specifically core constructed, more specifically, set champs. Yes, we just talked about set champs for Winter Spell in episode 58, just a scant few episodes ago as set champs approached for Winter Spell. We have a very truncated season for this newest set, Wilds Unknown. So we are diving into set championships already. So let's assess the situation together and let's think about some key factors that will help us succeed in picking up one of the Woody Jungle Guide playmats. So first and foremost, before I dive too far in, just want to give everybody a heads up. This one's going to be an unedited, well, they're all edited, but this one's going to be less carefully edited. The last one also fell into this bucket, so apologies for the past couple of weeks. It's just been crazy busy, and we figure an episode with a little bit of ums and uhs is better than no episode at all. So we'd rather talk to you a little bit and it be slightly rougher around the edges than not get to talk Disney Lorcana at all. So, set champs. We're talking about core constructed, and we're talking about a core constructed season that is the biggest in terms of cards that you can choose from. There's cards available from the maximum amount of sets that can be available in a core constructed format, which means the format has a lot of opportunity to do a lot of crazy things. We also have very little time before set champs, and we've had very little in terms of tournaments due to the fact that so much attention has been shined on Infinity as a format, which I think is fantastic. Like, this is not me bemoaning Infinity in any way. I think Infinity is awesome. I think a ton of exploration is being done, and the format looks like an absolute blast. But it does mean that core constructed has suffered from not as much data, not as much attention, and not as much thought put into it. So what are we seeing? In terms of the meta, not much has changed a lot from the previous meta. I would say the two strongest decks that are consistently strong in the format are Blurple and Dogs. Underneath of that, you have some combination of Amber Amethyst. You have in there the Sapphire Emerald deck, and I think coming in as something to keep on your mind would be some other things under that, something like Sapphire Steel, Sapphire Amber. You have Amber and Ruby is a contender in a few different configurations. I think there is a lot of power in the format right now, and I think that not a lot of people have given it a lot of thought. Just because, again, so much of our attention collectively with two major DLCs in Europe and North America is very laser-focused in on Infinity. So, looking at some results from like Charlie's Collectibles show recently in Houston and some other large tournaments, we can see that things are all over the place. Ruby Amethyst really shaking things up down there at Charlie's Collectibles. So, we've talked a lot over the course of 63 episodes of things to consider when you're going into a set championship. Now more than ever, one of those things gets highlighted, and that is your local meta. And knowing your local meta is paramount. You need to know who you're playing against. You need to know what these people tend to lean towards. You need to know what's popular in your area. You need to know what you can do in terms of what you're familiar with and what you've had time to do. Not a lot of time to really dive deep into any particular one strategy or one deck. For a lot of us, I've played, I think, 3 or 4 different decks. I personally have not had the most testing time online to practice or in person and paper with the team to practice. But I know that Sam has been trying to play as much as she can, and she's had a little bit more time to test, and she's been testing a lot of Amber and Emerald, but not necessarily dogs. She's been testing a lot of the Ruby Amethyst with a superhero bend to it, using a lot of the new the Incredibles cards to leverage an advantage. Looking at a lot of different strategies, Blurple, of course, mixed in there. So it's really interesting to see that, and almost anything right now is fairly viable. However, you have to know that you're going to have a weak matchup most likely in there. And I think I'll start kind of talking about that through the lens of Amber Amethyst, since that's a relatively newcomer on the scene for this set. Really popularized by the new Dale legendary card. And I think that this is really the card that's let the engine exist, being able to go turn 1, play a 1-drop, turn 2, play a Grandmother Willow, turn 3, play Dale, turn 4, play Elsa Fifth Spirit, and be able to just jam is pretty impressive. Like, I've definitely had some games where I could play like Will-O-the-Wisp into Grandmother Willow, into Dale, into Elsa, and clear a board, and have pretty much all of it survive. So it can be very strong. There's no question about that. But this deck is at its weakest against something like, believe it or not, Amber Emerald Dogs. Why is that? There's a card called Under the Sea. And this deck, while being able to hit very hard, Dale does not fundamentally change numbers, right? They just assign the damage based on their willpower, not the willpower is now the strength number. So when it comes to Under the Sea, Dale's an 0-4. When it comes to Under the Sea, Elsa Fifth Spirit's a 2-5. When it comes to Under the Sea, Grandmother Willow's a 1-2. So even if it's a 2-1, that wouldn't matter. But you can kind of get my point in that basically the whole deck is Under the Seeable. So it is an extremely weak matchup against the Dogs deck or similar Under the Sea decks. That includes Sapphire Emerald. That includes other variants that are playing Under the Sea in their 60 cards as well. So it's really weak to that. But it really plays well on decks like Blurple, where you have answers to a wide board because you have a board wipe and other colors don't. You have an immediate answer to other evasives that draws you a card. You're just so clean into so many things. I can't tell you how many awesome drops there are in this color combination, really bolstered by the fact that Dale is in the deck. I think it's just a really fun and interesting deck we haven't gotten to play around a lot with in the past, and it opens up a new way to play the game, but it has a direct, strong set of matchups, and it has a direct, very weak set of matchups. So it's a difficult road to hoe. If you know that your local meta, there's a lot of Dogs players, this isn't the right choice for you. But if you know your local meta has a lot of Blurple players, and all of a sudden that this Amber Amethyst deck becomes a lot more attractive and offer. So the things kind of underneath of Blurple and Dogs are decks that tend to have a bit of a direct counter to their strategy, where they're awesome and they look so good, but there is a deck that just simply almost undoes them just by the deck running as designed, which is scary. Like, that's a scary place to be. But this is a wide open meta, and there's kind of nothing that is off the table so long as you really understand fundamentally what you need to be doing in the matchups. And again, 63 episodes, we've talked about this same concept of Lorcana is a game without a sideboard or a side deck, meaning between games and a match, you cannot alter your deck. You can't change the construction. You can't tweak things to make it better into certain matchups. The concept of the game is that the system to resource, your inking system, is what does that for you, right? If I'm playing against a deck where a card is not good, but it's inkable, and I draw it, well, that's an easy choice for me to turn it into ink. So you're kind of essentially, as you play the game, altering the deck in a way to turn certain cards that are ineffective in the matchup into ink resources and keep the cards that are effective in the matchup. So your job as the player is to know what cards are effective and then learning in what way you should play them to maximize the benefit depending on what you're playing against, if that changes anything. Obviously, in my Dale scenario earlier, there's not too many decks that don't fall prey to just Elspeth's Spirit being a 5/5 rush evasive character. So, is what it is. That's just kind of just natively good. And I think that's a core concept to keep in mind is, does this deck have a play pattern that's just strong? Obviously, one of the biggest proponents of that is dogs. It's got one of the strongest outright opening lines where it can just either go right into a fast tramp, load the board up, Chromicon, load the board up, sing Under the Sea, and stay ahead for the rest of the very short game that you get to play against it because its board's already wide. That's become the hallmark of the deck. So you have to think about your deck in those contexts. Does it have a good, strong opening, and does it have a solid mid-game plan that can keep it and see it through into the late game? That's really what you're looking for. In the case of something like dogs, it wants to close the game very quickly, so it's not worried about getting to the end game. It's worried about its opening line and the mid game being so distinctly powerful by the time they play one of those key cards that the game is not able to be swung back in the favor of the opponent, because what they've done with their opening into this transition into the mid game is so strong that there's no need for them to go any further into the game. The mid game becomes the end game immediately. So that variation obviously is a little different for something like the Emerald and Sapphire deck, where it's trying to set up early resources with ramp, or try to set up a quick Clarabelle line, trying to lock the game down with John Silver after a board wipe. It's trying to do something distinctly powerful to grind its way to a win over time by setting up key pieces that lock the game down, depending on what the opponent is doing. So it needs to figure out what the best strategy is to determine that. Is it the Clarabelle line? Is it something like a John Silver line? Those are the things you have to start to unpack and figure out if that's going to work. You see Ink Geyser in that deck. Is this opponent I'm playing against playing something that I want to Ink Geyser? So they're things to think about, and you have to think about them carefully as you navigate the game. That's what the game is asking of you. So without that idea of a side deck, that means we have to think about every card we have in our 60 cards very carefully, and it has to serve a purpose. If you can justify what cards are in there, you have a good core, you can justify the other choices you've made, and you've practiced and you understand the order and the play patterns and what you should be doing with the cards as they're drawn, that's really the most you can ask of yourself going into this kind of a set championship. It should be very fun and interesting, because one of the ways people are going to try to eke out wins is they're going to bring something extremely unexpected. You might see a throwback to something like one of my very favorite decks that's never quite come together, the Sugar Rush Speedway combo, where you run racers through the speedways, sacrifice the finish line, and draw cards and gain lore. It's a really cool deck. It's really fun. It's never really had its day in the sun. It wasn't quite ever powerful enough to get there, but it plays close to a pure combo style deck, which is not something we often see in Lorcana, so that intrigues me, and it's a deck that I'm a fan of, and it's like a fun, cool deck to play. You might see something like that. Amber Ruby also has the boost deck with Webby's Diary. Amber Ruby also has the new Toys deck with Sid Phillips involved, as well as a slate of other things to banish for profit. So there's a bunch of different ways just in that color combination you can come up against something, which I think is exciting. I think Lorcana should be in a place where it's not just, oh, you're playing this, therefore you play this strategy. You're playing Amber and Steel, you're 100% on songs. I think it's great that we see something like, oh, you inked and played a one-drop Cinderella in Infinity. I don't know what you're doing yet for sure. especially if they inked a different amber card. You don't even know what their second ink color could be, but so much is powered by that opening line. We see similar things in core, especially in the amethyst color. Amethyst really just carrying so many decks right now as a power. So understanding what you do against certain decks, understanding the important cards in those matchups, understanding what you need to be doing baseline, and then how that plan changes depending on what you're playing against is of the utmost importance, because people are going to try to surprise you. They're going to come out of nowhere or come out of left field with something, and you're going to be like, wait, what are we doing? How am I supposed to, how do I beat that? So you have to stop, you have to critically analyze and think what you're doing, and you have to be able to apply, well, hopefully find the cards that help you, and then apply that plan, and hopefully your evaluation is correct. So that's kind of what Set Champs is going to be wide open. You're going to see people who are just playing what they think is just the de facto best deck. I do think you're going to see a rise in your local meta of the quote-unquote best decks with the Amber Emerald Dogs and the, of course, Amethyst Sapphire Blurple decks. I think you're going to see more of those because, especially Blurple, if somebody's had the cards together, the price point isn't a barrier anymore, and they will put it together and go, you know what? It's great. Merryweather is an absurd card right now in core. I'm just going to play this. I'll figure it out. Blurple's one of the, believe it or not, easier decks to teach someone to play with because the strategy is basically 100% of the time in the opening what you want to be doing. You want to play a 1-drop, you want to ramp, and then you want to play a 4-drop, and then you want to play usually Elsa. It doesn't change too much. Granted, you don't always get those cards, and then you have to think on your feet. But like the teaching someone to play, you can almost just give them a diagram of what to be doing. That's what they can do with Blurple. So I do think you're going to see a lot of that, and I do think you're going to see a lot of people really brewing. So I think you're going to see some of the best decks, and I think you're going to see a lot of brews coming up. So don't be afraid to use resources, look up things, look at tournament reports, look up online data. Take a peek if you listen to podcasts. Obviously you do. You're hearing me talk to you on a podcast. So appreciate you being here and listening to me. But I think that you also need to take some time, evaluate, and think. You're never going to bring the best deck, right? You could bring a good deck for the room. Like you definitely could walk away from your Set Champs going, damn, if I had just played the other deck, I would have gotten there today. Or I would have had a much better finish today. And you might be right. If you know your local meta well, you might be able to predict that. But if you had a deck that you were really good with, you were comfortable playing, you knew the ins and outs, and you were just, you know you're not going to drop any games to your own inefficiencies, or you had your prediction for the best deck in the room, but you've played it very, very little, I would 100% of the time tell you to take the deck you're comfortable with because you'll be able to overcome, even if you run into your difficult match. If your Set Champs is like 12 people, you're going to be able to really get in there at a reasonable rate, right? Like you're going to be able, let's say 16 people because it makes it easier. You're going to be able to get in at 3 and 2. You might bubble in if you're like 2-2-1. Like you don't, like it's very much up in the air sometimes at Set Champs with the way people play and the smaller turnouts. So just keep in mind that is definitely something that can happen for you. And just for me personally, I would much rather lose to I can't control what my opponent's going to play, and I can't control what the computer pairs me up against in terms of a person. That's out of my control. All I can do is play the best that I can play in the matchup. If I've done that and I've still lost, I'm not happy about it, but it's not going to bother me outside of the, beyond the tournament. If I make a play mistake because I took a deck irresponsibly that I didn't know too well, or I made a play mistake because I wasn't thinking clearly, those are the things that tend to stick with me more. So I would much rather play a known quantity that I'm comfortable with that I think can win versus trying to just next level the room. Will I try to play the best deck at times? Of course. Will I play a deck that tries to prey on the best deck at times? Also, of course. But more than ever for these kinds of Set Champs, the best thing in my opinion to do, and I mean Sam and I have been saying this and preaching this through so much of the life of the podcast. The absolute best thing that you can do for yourself to succeed at your set champs is know what you want to know, what you're playing, understand the matchups, understand the play patterns. You're really going to arm yourself the best way possible for set champs. I think if you try to, with the wide open, unexplored space that we have right now in this wild unknowns meta, unless you're like an expert on your local meta and anybody who rolls up outside of maybe like a couple people who drove a little bit to get there, you could identify what they're on and they play the same things and it doesn't change and you're like uber confident. Like, it just seems so unlikely that you're going to know every single thing about the local meta that's worth you like bucking the trend of playing a deck you're comfortable with to just take a shot in the dark. Also, that being said, understand what your expectations are at set champs. If you want to win the playmat, you need to think these things through. And that's kind of been the context of this conversation is you want to win the playmat. If you just want to go have a good time, maybe grab an enchanted, have fun. I do it. Generally, Sam and I will battle to see who can get the playmat. One of us generally will get the playmat. Yeah, I don't think we've missed a set champs getting a playmat between the two of us. Once we get the mat, it kind of opens the door for us to be allowed to play whatever fun decks we want to play. Because truthfully, going to hang out at set champs is an excuse to see people I don't see every week at locals a lot of the time. People I like to talk to, people who are on Team IllumiNation, people who I know from the local scene and I enjoy hearing from them and seeing them and catching up with them. It's more of a social, fun connection, and then we get just to play a game we enjoy. If I get there, great. If I don't get there, I'm not the happiest camper, I will admit, but I can live with the fact that I brought a silly deck or I brought a less than competitive level deck because I wanted to have fun and do the shenanigans. So just keep in mind, a lot of the times you might have that mindset, but is that really what you want? If you haven't gotten the mat yet, are you sure this is the right choice? Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to get upset when you bring your fun brew and you play against dogs 3 times and you go, well, the only reason I lost is because all these people are just sweaty tryhards who are just playing dogs. Now you're upset. You didn't have fun. You didn't do the thing. So your game plan was ruined. So just be sure to set realistic expectations of what you want to do and what the set champs you're going to looks like. I can tell you right now that like our local has set champs that barely scrape 8 people in some stores, and then at other stores they have to hard cap at like 40 something because the store just gets completely filled in with people. So it's all over the spectrum, and I would know going into, for me, I'd want to know going into that big, heavy, loaded set champs that I should probably bring something a little bit more serious. I've brought fun decks and gotten just stomped into the dirt because people are bringing more serious decks because it's the tournament of all of them for locals that looks the most like a legitimate, well-prized tournament. And I will say that the store that gets that turnout always prizes super well, so it's worth trying to do well there, even if you don't want the playmat, just for the prizing itself. So I think it's definitely worth keeping your expectations reasonable, understanding what you're doing, thinking things through, and at the end of the day, if you want to have fun, have a laugh, enjoy the game, that's the real win. You don't have to focus on the need to keep questing.